I was reminded this weekend that it is a Communion Sunday. As you can see, we have it all set. And so I was reminded that we should make sure that the sermon is short. And the people who questioned me about this last night, I can't make any promises to them that I can't keep. But along those lines, we have been looking this summer as we have had some transitions and adding First Palo Pinto to our shared ministry. So we've been looking at this summer, instead of our normal sermon series, we've just been using what's known as lectionary text. And the lectionary, for those of you who don't know, is a cheat sheet for pastors. It is a series of 3 years of scripture reading for every Sunday. And if you follow the lectionary text every single Sunday, by the end of 3 years, you will have preached or read every single passage in the Bible. You'll have read it cover to cover. Or if you're a preacher, you'll have preached it cover to cover. That's a lot of talking. But I lift it up because there's some times where the lectionary text just isn't very moving or empowering. But there are weeks like this week where I think it speaks deeply to the reality of our community. And so I lift that text up to you, the reading this week from John's Gospel, chapter 6. It's a chapter that most people know well because it's in chapter 6 we see two of Jesus' main miracles in John's Gospel. The first, the feeding of the 5,000. At the start of this Gospel, Jesus feeds 5,000 men, actually, as the text says, plus the women and children. But we simply notice the feeding of the 5,000. And he takes a few loaves of bread and a few loaves of fish, and through the miraculous sign of God, is able to feed thousands of people. And then, after feeding them, he gets in the boat and he walks. Well, he doesn't technically get in the boat. He sends his disciples across, and he walks across the sea to them. And you get the second major miracle in chapter 6 of John's Gospel, Jesus walking on the water. And they come to Capernaum, and they're there teaching, and sure enough, a crowd follows them. And it's pretty obvious why, as Jesus outlined at the start of the reading today. A crowd follows them, seeking more bread and fish. They literally just got a free meal, which was probably a very good meal, from this one Jesus guy, so they figure we'll walk across around the sea, we'll get in our boats, we'll sail over, and we'll get another free meal, because this guy's just handing out fish and bread. Think how popular someone would be if they set up on the corner downtown here and just passed out free food always. And so the people follow. Jesus very quickly understands what's happening and puts them to the test immediately and asks them, "What are you here for? You're just here because I fed you. In fact, you should be seeking something more substantial than just satisfying your day-to-day hunger." And so they get into a little dialogue, a little bit of an argument, Jesus and the crowd. The crowd presses and says, but even God provided our forefathers with manna from heaven, referencing the nation of Israel being led by Moses out of Egypt into the land of Canaan, where they wandered in the wilderness. And God provided for them through the dew of the morning and the manna from heaven. A similar foil to how Jesus provided for them just now with the fish and the loaves. And they said, "Look, you talk a big game, Jesus, but give us some more bread. You know what? Just show us another sign." As if the fish and the loaves weren't a big enough sign for them. Show us another sign, like the manna and the dew, something like Moses did. So Jesus corrects their theology a little bit, says, it wasn't Moses giving them food, it was God. And then goes further to say that they have to only follow and do God's work. And they say, what's God's work? Believing in the one who He has sent you. Jesus self-referencing Himself as the Messiah again. And then they ask, how can we believe if we don't have that sign again? They throw up another argument, another question. And finally, Jesus gets frustrated and is driven by being annoyed, kind of. the fact they're not getting the point, so he explains it as clearly as possible. And this isn't the only time you see this in the scripture. It's not the only time in teaching that Jesus becomes frustrated with his pupils or his disciples or the people following him. But he gets frustrated and he says, look everyone, look, I am the bread of life. I am the one who God has sent. I am the one who, if you come to me, you'll never be thirsty. A lot of times people read this as a stoic Jesus emotionlessly saying or teaching this to the crowd. But this is a frustrated Jesus, an annoyed Jesus, after having tried to drill this point home to all of these people for a long time, finally breaks down and says it as plainly as possible. I am the bread of life. Think about back in the day when you were in elementary school. Or if you're in elementary school now, think about being in school. It's the point where the teacher gets frustrated with your class because he or she is trying to teach you an elementary idea. It's like being in second grade and trying to teach basic multiplication again, and the class is just not getting it. And finally, the frustrated teacher walks up to the board and writes 2 times 2 equals 4. As if there's no other way to get the point across. And that's what Jesus is doing in verse 35, the key verse in this passage. He has been frustrated. These are people who have sought out more food, sought out temporary satisfaction. And then when he offered them more of himself, they didn't get it. So he has to break it down in the most simple term possible. Let's not beat around the bush anymore, y'all. This is the reality. I am the bread of life. No one who comes to me will be hungry again. Obviously talking about not physical hunger, but some deep spiritual reality. It's kind of like stray cats, which, if you live in Mineral Wells, you're not unaccustomed to stray cats. I know on Northwest Mountain we have more than our fair share of stray cats. And everyone knows this reality. You feed a stray cat, it becomes your cat. Or better put, you become its person. And to drive it home very personally, we had an issue with a stray cat this last winter. We have a family that lives across from the parsonage that are members, and they got together with our family and realized we had a pregnant stray mama cat that was going to have kittens in our backyard at the start of a really cold snap in the winter. So between this member's family and our family, we decided, with one dissenting vote, that we would take in the mama cat and the stray kittens. And we nursed them back to health, we got them shots, we adopted them to loving homes. And the day came, eviction day. We had to take Mama Kitty and put her back out in the wild. And I had dreams of releasing her, opening the door, and like a conservationist releases a captive animal they've nursed to health, opening the door and she's fleeing off into a bliss of wild, happy life. And in fact, though, we opened the door and it was very anticlimactic. We picked up the mama cat, opened the back patio door of the parsonage and set her down, and then closed the door, and it was glass so we could see through it. And we set her down, and we inched back in, closed the door, and looked. And she looked outside at the warm spring day and looked back at the glass, and then turned around and started meowing. And we tried to ignore it. But finally, we had to give in and just open the door, and she pranced back in, jumped up on the couch, and fell asleep. This stray cat had become ours because we'd fed it. And I bring this up because this is exactly the mentality that people have as they're following Jesus. They're chasing after a fleeting happiness. We want to be with with the guy that gives us free food. Said every stray cat when it came near our house. Said the people as they crossed the Sea of Galilee to Capernaum. And Jesus responds to them by saying there should be something so much more significant in your life that you're seeking than just free food. And he's arguing not just about food, but about the fleeting reality of happiness. Oftentimes in our culture, we're given over to the idea that we are to seek happiness, a fleeting happiness. And the ways we fill that void inside of us change. And they change drastically. Just look at a few things. First, one of the things that shocked me this week as I was preparing was the reality that so many teenage drivers are putting off getting their driver's license. And this is actually a national trend you can track throughout the whole country. The rates of teenage drivers are actually plummeting. And in the article I read, they extrapolated, they talked about reasons why this, that, and the other. But I think the key reason comes down to satisfaction. When I was growing up before smartphones, a driver's license was a passport to freedom. It allowed us to be self-satisfied. We could go have fun with our friends. We could go cruise the streets, hang out at Walmart because we grew up in a small town. We could go do all these fun things. We could go have grand adventures by ourselves because the freedom transportation offered as long as we were home by 8:30 p.m. It allowed us to satisfy a deep desire for happiness. And that desire is met somewhere else now. It's changed, it's moved on. And so teenagers aren't getting their driver's licenses in as big of numbers as they used to. And it's actually having a widespread effect on other things. You notice there were several businesses, even in our own town, that were unable to open on time this summer. Seasonal businesses because they couldn't get enough workers. The city pool had to cut back hours because not enough teenagers wanted to be lifeguards this year, or not enough teenagers had a license to go drive to be a lifeguard. Another way that how we satisfy ourselves is changing. Back at the turn of the century, not the 21st, but the 20th century, the biggest sport in America was baseball. It was the biggest sport. We built grand stadiums to encompass the living legends that played in them. One of my only times meeting my maternal grandmother on the farm in South Dakota, as a 10-year-old, I asked her about my mom's name. My mom's name was Ruth. And assuming, as a 10-year-old, that, they're very staunchly Catholic, it must have something to do with the Bible, I asked her, why she named my mom after Ruth in the Bible. And she corrected me very quickly and very sternly. I named her after someone so much more important. I named her after Babe Ruth. And then I, as a 10-year-old, said probably the worst thing a 10-year-old could say in that situation. Hey, Grandma, who is Babe Ruth? Sticking my foot in my mouth. It started at an early age, folks. But somewhere in the 20th century, a transition happened. To fill our pastime, we'd always turn to baseball. It was the go-to national sport. Is the thing we poured all of our excess time, energy, passion into when it came to sports. And somewhere along the line that shifted to football. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. The nation's eye, or where it gets its satisfaction for sports, shifted and changed. And I bring up these two examples to lift up one thing. The idea of satisfying ourselves is a fleeting idea. Whether it's a license in teenage freedom, whether it's pastime in sports, whatever it is, when we look for happiness, and how that happiness comes about us in this created world, all of those things shift and change through time. The journey to find that happiness, that satisfaction in life is fleeting. Instead, God calls us in the passage today to set down that journey to find satisfaction and pick up the joy that He offers us in Jesus Christ. But no, most of the time in our culture we ignore that. In graduate school and on the counseling side, in our marriage therapy classes, we often talked about just some stereotypical things you see in marriages, and a lot of it relates around this desire to be happy or satisfied. So you'll see a couple and they'll come in, as one professor told us, and they'll have an issue, a deep problem in their relationship. And their solution will not be, let's work on the problem that is at hand, but their solution will be, well, maybe if we get married. If we get married, that'll make the problem go away. It'll make it better. So they get married, and with a marriage, there's lots of anxiety, but there's lots of fun. It's a big party. There are presents, and someone spends a lot of money, and you have a good time, and there's a honeymoon. But when all of that fades, the problem's back, but now they're also married. And so seeking happiness, they go to the next step, and they say, well, we're still unhappy, but now we're unhappy together permanently, so let's buy a house. I kid you not, this happens like this in relationships. Let's make the next big purchase, because obviously that'll make us happy. And sure, there's excitement, there's fun, a new place, shopping, colors for walls, finishes, where are we going to live, what's the yard going to look like. But then reality sets in, and adding the house doesn't make them any happier. In fact, it just traps them to a place and a loan and debt. So they're back to square one, but now they're married and with a house. So then the next obvious step, well, we're still unhappy. But I bet if we have a kid, that'll fix that. I bet if we have children, that will draw us together and resolve everything, and they have a child, and it is great and awesome until they leave the hospital. And then they realize how much stress and work and expense and anxiety is. And they get to the end of the road and they have children, unless you're millennials like me and you have pets that are like children. You have a house, you have a spouse, and you still find yourselves deeply unhappy. And that's the point, the professor said, when they actually come to counseling. In our culture, it is ingrained in us to pursue happiness. Even if you look at the founding documents for our nation, they guarantee what? The rights to pursue happiness. It's not just freedom, but the pursuit of happiness is foundational in our Declaration of Independence. It's foundational to who we are. We spend our lives pursuing that happiness and satisfaction. We are no different than the people who crossed the Sea of Galilee following after Jesus, asking for more bread and more fish. And Jesus comes to us and says it's not about happiness and satisfaction. Because everything you could add to your life, whether it's a spouse or a house or children, whether it's sports or a new car or a new job, whatever you can add to your life will never give you a deep, abiding joy. Or as Jesus would say, you'll be hungry again. Instead, He reminds them and reminds us today that He alone is the bread of life. All who come to Him will never be hungry again. He alone will make sure that those who come to Him are never thirsty. Not in the sense of hunger or thirst, but in the sense of happiness and satisfaction. Our obsession with following a fleeting happiness and satisfaction from this created world is dispelled by Jesus' bold claim that He alone can offer us abiding joy that far surpasses this world's ability to add or detract from our happiness. He alone offers us something here in verse 35 that is foundational to our identity. He alone can make sure that whether we go or come, whether we're young or old, whether we're sitting here or elsewhere, He alone, to all who come to Him, He alone can make sure that they are filled with deep, abiding joy. See, we struggle vainly to try to find happiness and satisfaction in this world. We fill our schedules with stuff. We buy things. We look at careers thinking all of this stuff, all of these things, all of these activities are going to be like that bread and that fish, and they're going to make us happy again. But in reality, the one thing that brings us joy, which is something so much more deeper, so much more immovable than happiness and satisfaction. The one thing that brings us joy is the relationship Christ offers to us. And I offer that to you now. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry. And whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Come now, taste and see the bread of life. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.